To make sure that products belong to a user, the journey starts at the place where we add a product, because that is where we created initially, that is where we should therefore store the user ID of the logged in user as part of our product data. Now you could change your product model here in Dart, in the product Dart file, to include a new user ID value here. But we don't really need that. The user ID is more something that we want to store on the server. So it should suffice for now if we send our data here to the server and there we add a new key, which is only stored on the server, not in our local model, which you could name user ID or creator ID to make it really clear what's in there. And that points at the user ID property, which we already have in the product start file, which is set to the user who's logged in. So now we're also storing this on the server when a new product is created. Let's first of all try that before we adjust the fetching logic. So let's create a new product as some book for $29.99 here. This is an amazing book. Let me use the image I used before. Save that. And on Firebase, now on this new book, we see a new entry. We see the creator ID. And that's the ID of the user who's currently logged in. The other two products right now have no creator ID entry, but we can manually cheat one in there. For that, let's first of all go to the authentication section, and let's actually take the ID of the other user. So simply create a second user if you don't have a second user yet. So I take the user of the second user, the one who's currently not logged in, the one which I just didn't use for creating that product. And now back in the database here on the products, you can click that plus button here if you hover over a product ID and add a new key value pair. And there I'll add creator ID. Make sure to spell it as you spell it down there and enter that ID as a value. Click add thereafter and do that on the other product too. And with that, we cheated a bit. We made sure that the products belong to the other user. So we have 3 products. One belongs to the second user with whom I'm currently logged in. The other 2 belong to the other user. Now let's work on fetching. Let's make sure we only fetch the products for the user who's logged in. For that, in fetch and set products, we need to filter the products we're fetching. And this is now a server-side task. You do that filtering on the server side because you don't want to fetch all products and then filter by ID on the client. You could do that, but that would be a lot of work on the client. That should rather happen on the server. Otherwise, you're hitting your server, fetching hundreds of entries from the database just to filter out one entry on the client. You would transfer loads of data, would slow down your server, would slow down your client just to get one product. That's not what you want to do. Instead, you want to make sure that the filtering happens on the server, best before the database is hit or when the database is hit, and then you only get back what you really need. Thankfully, Firebase has a built-in filtering mechanism. The service you're using might also have that. And if you're building your own backend, you might want to add such a service or such a capability if you need it. So how do we tell Firebase to filter though? You can add another query parameter before or after that token thing with an ampersand. So you only have the question mark before you add all your optional query parameters at the end. Thereafter, you separate them with ampersand symbols. And there you add order by, written like this, with a capital B. And then between double quotes, or single quotes if you used double quotes to surround your string, the key by which you want to filter, which in our case is creator ID. So here I want to filter by creator ID. And then you add another key value pair, so one more ampersand. And then you add equal to. And these are, of course, special commands which Firebase understands. You can't use them with any server. These are Firebase specific. You said equal to double quotes, and now between the double quotes, your user ID, which you can inject with string interpolation like that. But you need surrounding double quotes around that. Now this tells Firebase that you essentially want to filter by creator ID, and only where it's equal to your user ID, only these entries should be returned. Now important, for this to work, you also need to change something on Firebase side. Here under rules, you need to configure a so-called index, which simply is required by Firebase to optimize the way it interacts with the database and to support such filtering. again, this is now Firebase specific here. You set such an index simply here after read and write by specifying the name of the node which you want to index, and that is the products node here. Then a colon and then a curly braces, and then in there you add double quotes and then dot index on, which is a keyword understood by Firebase, then a colon, and then in an array or in a list, so between square brackets, the fields by which you want to be able to filter. In our case, between double quotes, that's just the creator ID, or whatever you named the field. You can then publish that. With that, you should be able to save all of that. And now when you reload this screen, you only see one entry here. And if I refresh it and log in with the other user, we should only see the 2 products that belong to that other user. In my case, the test@test.com user. So let's log in here. On the shop page, we also only see these 2. We'll have to fix that, but under manage products too. Now on the shop page, I of course want to see all, and the fix could be that we make this method a bit more flexible. We could add a Boolean argument, filter by user, and the default here, and for that we can wrap this into square brackets to have an optional positional argument. The default could be false. You don't have to set a default, but you can. And therefore, if this argument isn't provided, and you also learned this at the beginning of the course, square brackets around a positional argument make it optional, but then you should provide a default value. So if this is not provided, we'll have that available, but it's set to false, or we do pass in a value for this argument, and then we could set it to true. Now we can use that to determine whether we want to add this or not. So here we can actually add another runtime constant variable, filter string, or whatever you want to name it. And there we check filter by user. And if that is true, then we want to set this to this string here. So cut that. This is then the value. Whoops, between single quotes. This is then the value. And otherwise, we'll have an empty string here, because otherwise we'll not filter. And then here we simply inject filter string with string interpolation. The ampersand is in between the 2 string interpolations here. So with that, we should now only attach this filter string if this is set to true. By default, it's not. So on the user product screen, where we want to filter by user, we should set it to true. Now here is where we call fetch and set products. So here I want to pass in true to filter by user. So now if you save all files and maybe do a full refresh, you should see that if you now log in on the products overview screen, you actually do see all products, so all 3 products in my case here, but on the manage products screen, you only see 2. So here we have 3. Please note that the favorite status is also detected correctly. And on manage products, if we reload, we only have 2. Now the problem is, when I first visit this, we don't fetch the data, and therefore when I first visit this page, I actually see all my products. Now that of course is also not something we want. So the solution here would be to simply also fetch products when this page first loads. Previously in the app, we didn't need that because we always fetch the same products in both pages. So there was no need to fetch products when we visit the Manage Products page. But now, since we actually want to fetch different data, we should definitely also fetch data when we first load that. So back here, since we have a status widget, we could convert this to a stateful widget or use the future builder you learned about earlier. And as a side note, because I just see it, we can also set listen to false here. Doesn't matter too much because we're having a listener here anyways, but we can still do it to be clear that we hear only dispatch. But back to the original point I had, or what I wanted to do, we can now wrap this entire page, or actually at least the body, with a new widget, and that should be that future builder here in the end. That future builder will, of course, get a builder here, not a child, and that builder is a function which receives a context, and that the data our future will resolve to, or that snapshot. And go back to the HTTP section if it's unclear how that works. I showed it there. And the future builder also, besides the builder, needs a future to which it should listen, or for which it should wait. And that's, of course, the future returned by refresh products. So here I can simply call underscore refresh products. And here I do execute this right away because I want to call it right when this first gets parsed, when this page gets loaded. Forward my context to there because I need it in refresh products, and we should be good. Now this will build that. And in here, we can now check if we're currently in a connection state where we're waiting by comparing this to the connection state enum here and checking whether this is waiting, in which case we could return a centered circular progress indicator. And only otherwise return our main content with the refresh indicator in our list view. Now, one problem we'll have here, we rebuilt the entire page thanks to that listener whenever our products change, and currently that would trigger an infinite loop. Because here with the future builder, I'm calling refresh products, which goes ahead and fetches products. This will update the products, this will retrigger build, this will retrigger the future builder. Not what I want. Would be better if only a part of this screen would rebuild, only the part down there if we have new products. That's something we can do, of course, with the help of a consumer. So we can wrap this padding here with a new widget, and that would be the consumer pointing at products. And the consumer, as you learned, also takes a builder, and that builder gives you or wants a function which gets the context, which gets that products data and maybe a child, which you don't have to use though. I don't need it, so I'll just add a blank here, just an underscore. And now with this, we have a setup where we should, thanks to the future builder, fetch data when this first loads, when this first builds, and then whenever it rebuilds, but it shouldn't rebuild here. Then we either show the progress indicator, or once that's done, our main page with the surrounding refresh indicator. There we can refresh products, and now it's really important that you have listen false here, otherwise you will get that infinite loop I described earlier. And once you refresh or once the initial loading is done, in the end, thanks to the consumer, that list here will be built and rebuilt. So let's give that a try and let's see whether it works. Let me also print something here to rule out that we have an infinite loop. So let's do a full refresh and then log in here with test@test.com and testers here. Log in and we go to the shop page, of course. Let's now go to manage products. We see the loading spinner, we see our products, and we were only rebuilding once. If I refresh here, we didn't rebuild again, so that's great. So this works. If I go back to the shop, we load the data there, and we have 3 products here, but only 2 products there on manage products. So this is now working as it should, and now we're making sure that we can really only work with the products we own.